Hello once again. I'm sorry I wasn't able to report on the tiebreak games of round 3. Life's been a bit busy. As you'll no doubt be aware, one of the big beasts was knocked out of the tournament. Vladimir Kramnik lost against Dmitry Andreikin. So he blows his chance of heading for the candidates. So now we move into round 4. Just 16 players remain. In game 1 of the matches played today, there were 4 decisive results, and we're going to look at one of them. The game between Shahriar Mamedyarov against Fabiano Caruana. Of course, Mamedyarov playing on his home soil in Baku, so he's got a lot of support there. So he played bishop g5 in this position. Now that's really very offbeat. Why did he do this? Well, it's to avoid Caruana's massive amounts of theory. Caruana plays the Grunfeld, knows it backwards. It's a very theoretical opening. So this unusual move was played to avoid Caruana's theoretical knowledge. Now, there's a good reason why this move is unusual, because I don't think it's very good. And there's a good reason why in beginners' textbooks they always say knights before bishops. Here, black can play knight e4, hitting the bishop, and after this, c5 very neatly exploits the weakness of this diagonal and the long diagonal too. With that pawn advancing to c4, it weakens both those diagonals, and already black has adequate counterplay. Mamedyarov has actually played in this way before. He played f3 against Aronian, didn't get much out of the opening there. Played queen c2 today. It's no better or no worse, and no worse than f3. It's just different, and that is the point of Mamedyarov's opening. He's just trying to confuse Caruana. Queen a5 check, good move. That more or less forces knight d2. And now f5 supporting that knight, which was attacked by the queen. So the position looks a little bit like a Leningrad Dutch, actually. Or a very favourable Leningrad Dutch for black. Here previously, Jonathan Spielman has played knight f3, and he beat Jan Elvest in a very nice game, actually. But, well, okay, that's another story. I think knight f3 doesn't give white any theoretical advantage. Mamedyarov played f3. Now, if the knight is exchanged, then certainly white would be fine in this position, because white gets to the long diagonal first. So knight f6 from Caruana, good move. And that pawn is something of a problem for white. You might recall a game between Wesley So and Levon Aronian from the Sinkfield Cup, where, yes, the knight isn't too happy about that pawn on f3. So it's going to take white some time to bring out his kingside pieces. And, well, black can exploit that. So, first of all, Mamedyarov had to deal with the threat to the pawn in the middle. So e4, knight a6. You can see black's development is much quicker and much easier than white's. Knight e2. Well, yeah, it creates a traffic jam, but, you know, what else, actually? Black exchanged, and bishop g7. What an inviting diagonal that is for the bishop. So knight c3. Clearing the way for the bishop to develop and blocking this diagonal. Fabiano castled, and bishop e2. And here is a crunch moment in the game. It's interesting that after just 13 moves, I think this is actually quite a critical position. And, well, I think that's what Mamedyarov wanted. He wanted to create an early crisis to test Caruana. Here, I think knight b4 is a very good move. If the queen goes the wrong way, then there are going to be tactics here. Well, for example, queen d1, and black wins a pawn. So let's say queen c1, which indirectly defends the bishop. And now knight g4. Of course, that can't be taken because there's a knight e3 check. So let's say h3, and the knight spins back to e5, wants to come in here, and there's a threat here. So white has to exchange off, and black is left with a monster bishop in the middle of the board. Those dart squares, well, I would say that black is already better here. Instead, after 15 minutes, Caruana came up with knight h5, which also looks very tempting. The bishop has to move, bishop g5. And now I think black should still be okay after knight f4, and then something like this. Well, we're about to see a rather similar position in the game, except here black's pawns are intact on the king side, and I think, you know, that should be fine for black. Okay, but compare with what happens in the game. Queen d8. So full-scale retreat, but I think Caruana is hoping to switch to the king side. But this allows bishop takes knight. There's a very famous game where a similar exchange happened in a Benoni. Game 3 of the Fischer-Spassky match in 1972 in Reykjavik, where Fischer played knight h5 and allowed this exchange, allowed his pawns to be doubled, but managed to generate very nice play on the king side, and switched his queen over to g6, and perhaps that's what Caruana had in the back of his head. I mean, since that game in 72, this is almost a commonplace idea in the Benoni and the King's Indian, actually. But here, well, let's see how it works out. Well, I think black should play bishop g4 in this case. Caruana played and I don't think that's too bad for black, actually. Caruana played h6, and I really don't like this move. It creates a weakness on g6. Okay, it's not possible to see at the moment that can be exploited, but just get a bad feeling about that move. And that pawn on h6 can also be a target sometimes. Bishop drop back, and now bishop g4. And castles, and, well, I think this is a better way for black to play. And now queen f8. I think white is better here. Maybe rook f1, maybe queen g2, maybe even king f2 in this position, actually, and rook g1. I'm sure white is better here, but I still think this is a better version than the game. e6 was played, and the problem is this weakens the d6 pawn. Queen d2. From this moment on, Mamedyarov plays beautifully. So first of all, gains a tempo here, and rook d1. So there are now threats against this pawn, so Caruana feels the need to close the position. Now rook f2. I think this is perhaps the last moment where black could exchange on f3. Knight c7. That knight was doing absolutely nothing on a6, so it has to come back into the game. In fact, this is one of the huge problems with black's position. This knight takes an age to get anywhere. It's simply out of the game. If it tries to switch to the king side, then communication is broken, and this is absolutely fatal. So after this trade, then white is going to win the pawn on g5. The basic problem with black's position is lack of space, and that means that the communication is very poor within his camp. Can't coordinate his pieces, can't bring these pieces over to the king side easily. Rook b8 played. Well, this is all a bit in vain, because actually b5 is just too slow. h3. Now, if pieces are exchanged here, we can see very clearly what effect it has when the pawn no longer stands on g6. f5 is not covered, and white breaks in very easily with using this wonderful outpost. So here, white switches over to the king side. something like this, queen g4, there you go, told you g6 was weak, and we've got knight here coming, we've got queen, well, if knight f6, then queen takes h4, and this rook on b8 is doing nothing. Bishop dropped back to d7, and now very nice manoeuvre from Mamedyarov. Still seems as though black is absolutely fine here, but knight e2 I think emphasises the difference between the two positions. This knight can't get into play, this knight can. So all white's pieces are moving towards the king side, and black simply can't match the firepower in this position. If b5 looks like the natural move to get counterplay, it's simply too slow. Knight g3 is absolutely fatal. Something like this, it's practically all over. It's extraordinary, actually. h4 was played, trying to prevent knight g3, but now king h2, really simple. And again, b5 would just be too slow. It would be met in a similar way. g3 is just gets the knight into play, and this is so incredibly easy for white to play. If that bishop drops back, then the rooks break through. It's mate, very, or winning material very quickly. So the knight came to e8. Mamedyarov exchanged off the bishop and took on h6. And now, well, with knight g5 coming, there is absolutely no defence. I mean, this is so easy. I'm actually amazed that Caruana continued in this position. It is just hopeless. Clearly, that bishop can't be taken because of a terrible discovered check. Now, it's hardly surprising that with these pieces against practically a lone king, that it's over. So let's just see the final moves. That's a discovered check. I mean, there must be many ways to win this position. What Mamedyarov did was very simple and very effective. So now the queen comes into play. And the rook, threatening rook h6 mate. The king goes back, bishop f6. I mean, this is an absolute massacre, threatening rook g7. And after this, there was no defense to rook h8 mate. A disastrous game for Caruana. But for Mamedyarov, well, he's put himself in a fantastic position, just needs to draw in the next game to go through. After this game was finished, Mamedyarov received a round of applause from the home crowd. He has, of course, lots of supporters there. So, other games, we have, in the all-Chinese battle, Ding Liren defeated Wei Yi. That's a crunch encounter. Svidler defeated Topalov. Now that's very interesting. Topalov not guaranteed to qualify. It's possible he'll qualify on average rating for the candidates, but he needs to keep his rating up. So that's significant. And Hikaru Nakamura defeated Michael Adams. The other games were drawn. So game 2 tomorrow. Watch out for my report.